Discover the amazing truths of Greece. 5 transformative myths behind its most cursed families. Grace stood in the cramped attic, dust motes swirling around her like memories she couldn't quite grasp. A musty scent filled the air as she rummaged through her grandmother's belongings, each item whispering stories of her family's tumultuous past, financial struggles, betrayals, lost opportunities. The weight of it all pressed down on her, suffocating even. Nursing under the blaring fluorescent lights of St. Michael's Hospital felt like a cruel joke when her own life mirrored the chaotic narratives she dispatches to patients. She was supposed to be a healer, yet she often felt more like a damsel entangled in a legacy of misfortune. Her fingers brushed against an old, dusty journal, its cover faded, perhaps forgotten like the stories within. The moment she opened it, she was transported into a world of ancient Greek myths, tales that echoed with the agony and triumph of families long past. Did her own family carry such curses? As she read passages filled with echoes of betrayal and unyielding fate, she felt a tremor in her resolve. Were they merely myths, or were they warnings, dire reflections of her bloodline? Unease bubbled within her, entwining with a desperate yearning for understanding. Her heart raced, not from anxiety, but from the urgent reality that perhaps her story was not entirely her own. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can, leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue with Max, the charming history professor who ignited her imagination. The stories sparkled with new life. He traced the complex lines of history and philosophy, drawing parallels that left her dizzy with the possibilities. You have the strength of your ancestors, Grace, he insisted, his eyes gleaming with passion. But the more she engaged with these ideas, the more the tendrils of doubt snaked around her heart. Could she step out of the shadows they cast? How could she, an embodiment of their struggles, possibly envision a future untangled from their failures? A storm brewed inside her as she faced oppressive realities at work. An unjust bureaucratic crisis loomed, threatening her colleagues and her ethos as a caregiver. Her relentless sense of loyalty clashed with the ambition ignited by her readings. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had to choose between family ties and her own moral compass. Each decision felt weighted, pulling her deeper into a quagmire of familial obligation. If she failed to rise against the institution's oppressive hand, would her family's tale of woe continue? Would she allow their narrative to dictate the unfolding of her own? As anguished voices echoed in her mind, Grace felt the pull of ancestral patterns battling against her desire for liberation. At that moment, as she hesitated at the crossroads of ambition and duty, she realized her narrative was still being written. With historical burdens pressing her, Grace teetered before her next move. She could continue the fight against the oppressive realities she faced, or she could succumb to the weight of her lineage. All she knew was the echoes of the journal's myths sung a haunting song. As the attic grew darker, the precarious threads of her identity wove tighter, and she sensed that whatever decision lingered ahead would irrevocably change her future. Would she emerge stronger, or would the weight of her family's legacy enforce a silence she feared more than any failure? Grace descended from the attic, her heart pounding with a frenetic energy that coursed through her like wildfire. The journal lay heavy in her bag, its pages fraught with whispers of past failures, yet laden with the possibility of transformation. Each step she took closer to her own reality felt like a defiance of the legacy she had inherited. It was as if the stories of her ancestors, once oppressive burdens, now ignited a fire within her. Returning to the hospital felt like entering a battleground. The sterile hallways echoed with the cries of patients and the hushed conversations of medical staff overwhelmed by the bureaucratic system. Grace clenched her fists, the weight of the journal a reminder that she was a part of something bigger, a story not just limited to the present, but intertwined with ancient struggles and triumphs. Her shift began in the maternity ward, where life blossomed anew every minute. She moved swiftly, handling her duties with a precision that belied the chaos brewing inside her mind. Yet each smile from a new mother felt like a challenge, a stark contrast to the callousness she witnessed in the higher echelons of hospital administration. The dissonance gnawed at her, a reminder of the tension between her professional responsibilities and her moral compass. "Grace!" A familiar voice pulled her from her reverie. It was Jay, a fellow nurse who often acted as her ally amidst the pressures of the job. "Did you hear about the memos going around? There are rumors about budget cuts and layoffs. It's going to get ugly." Her stomach twisted. The stakes were higher than she had imagined. The very essence of care she provided hinged precariously on a system that didn't seem to value it. Doubt crept back in, whispering that perhaps she was powerless to effect change. "No," Grace replied, a fierce determination rising within as she remembered the stories of her ancestors. "We cannot let this continue. We need to stand up and fight for what's right." Jay looked at her, surprise etched on his face. "Fight? What do you mean? The narratives that have shaped us for generations are not over. If we let this go unchallenged, we're perpetuating a cycle," she asserted, conviction strengthening her voice. The idea of reversing a course set by years of turmoil invigorated her. As bleak as the situation appeared, she realized it was also an opportunity for rebirth. In the following days, Grace transformed how she interacted with her colleagues. With every conversation, she weaved insights from her readings with Max into her discussions, framing the challenges they faced as more than mere obstacles. They were part of their journey. She encouraged others to voice their concerns and brainstorm solutions, her energy sparking a small but growing movement among staff members. As they met during breaks, she found not only solidarity but also the strength they had collectively lacked. But the clock ticked relentlessly, and the looming threat of layoffs weighed heavily on her. Each revelatory moment only intensified her focus. Yet, uncertainty settled like dense fog. She grappled with her responsibilities as a caregiver amidst her growing sense of agency. Would her actions hold meaning, or were they doomed to be futile gestures against a colossal institution? Her determination wavered when she learned about a pivotal meeting scheduled between hospital management and the nursing staff. Would they allow her voice to matter, or was she destined to blend into the shadows? The time had come to face the critical choice she'd been avoiding, where her moral duty clashed with institutional compliance. As she prepared for that meeting, the legacy of those who came before her echoed in her mind, igniting an ember of courage she couldn't ignore. The decisions ahead could shatter her understanding of personal identity, and perhaps redefine her future in ways she had never anticipated. The moment of truth loomed large, and the weight of her family's stories pressed down upon her, demanding she step into the light they had once feared. Would she emerge a changemaker or succumb to the currents pulling her back? The answer lay just out of reach, waiting to be discovered. Grace stood at the threshold of the meeting room, her heart racing as she looked at the polished wood table, a battleground for ideas and ideologies. The space felt ominous under the harsh fluorescent lights, casting shadows that morphed into figures representing her doubts. She inhaled deeply, searching for the composure she had invoked in her colleagues. But the reality of what lay ahead twisted in her stomach like a knot as the managing director took her place at the head of the table, the room filled with apprehensive faces. Their tired expressions reflected the weight of accumulated frustrations that echoed through the hospital's hallways. The air felt thick with expectation. Grace's pulse quickened, not just from anxiety but from a familiar rush of determination. She was here to speak not just for herself, but for each voice that had been drowned out by the bureaucratic machinery. The stories she had drawn strength from surged within her, urging her to break free from her self-imposed constraints. This was her moment. The managing director commenced with a preamble about budget constraints and the impending decisions that would affect staff across departments. Grace could hear the resignation in the voices of her colleagues as they internally braced for what was to come. As she opened her mouth to contribute, the words stuck in her throat. Doubt flickered like a dying flame. Would they even listen? Would her voice matter? Suddenly, the director turned towards the nursing staff, a glimmer of challenge in her eyes. As we face these decisions, I invite your feedback. What do you believe is necessary for us to move forward? The moment hung in the air, heavy like the humid summer heat. With every passing second, Grace felt the journal's weight in her bag, a reminder of the legacy she bore. In a moment of clarity, she realized that she could no longer remain passive. She could redefine what it meant to be heard. Without warning, she stood. We have to start with recognizing that nursing isn't just a role. It's a commitment to caring, and that comes first, not second to budget sheets. Her voice trembled yet carried an unexpected strength, igniting a ripple of attention around the table. Faces turned, some surprised, others intrigued. Even Jay, who had quietly supported her, turned to her with wide eyes. And if we allow departments to suffer while patients are sidelined, we're complicit in this cycle of neglect. She pressed on, emboldened. We must voice our needs before these decisions are made. Eliminating staff will not save us. It will break us. Emboldened by her own words, she laid out a series of proposals addressing both financial constraints and patient care that prioritized morale among staff. The managing director's expression shifted from curiosity to skepticism, and for a moment, Grace felt her conviction waver. We all want the same things, the director replied, her tone measured but firm. But what you're asking for requires resources that we simply do not have. We have to look at the economics of our situation. Then let us explore solutions together, not pit us against one another, Grace countered, her anxiety fueling her tenacity. If we are asked to tighten our belts, make that a campaign of solidarity, not misery. We can streamline processes, eliminate waste, and still uphold the quality of care. But we need buy-in from management and respect for our voices. The director regarded her, her demeanor shifting. A flicker of admiration crossed her face, and Grace felt a stirring of hope. Perhaps this was the pivotal moment she had been wrestling with, the moment to carve out a voice not only for herself but for her colleagues. But just as Grace felt the tide turning, a member of the administration interjected with an air of authority. Change cannot come without sacrifices, he declared. Are you prepared to be part of that sacrifice? Grace clenched her jaw, sensing the stakes rising. It was time to confront, to refuse to back down before oppression masked as logic. I'm prepared to fight for care, not just cuts, she declared fiercely, her heart hammering against her ribs. Anticipation crackled in the air. Would this lead to solidarity or division? Could she cause the change she desperately sought, or was this merely a prelude to her own disenchantment? The choice loomed ahead, a precipice between compliance and rebellion. Little did she know, the very fabric of her professional journey depended on this confrontation and what revelations awaited her in the aftermath. What would her stand cost her, and how far would she have to go to become the champion she believed was needed? Grace's heartbeat echoed in her ears, as she absorbed the tension swirling around the meeting table. With that bold declaration hanging in the air, the weight of expectation shifted from her shoulders to the entire room. Colleagues exchanged glances, whispers of uncertainty passing between them like a flickering light. She had drawn a line in the sand, yet she knew the path ahead could fracture the fragile camaraderie they shared. Throughout the ensuing silence, doubt crept in again. Moments earlier, she had felt invigorated, but now the weight of the stakes anchored her fear. How would they respond? Would they embrace her vision, or would it incite defensiveness from those entrenched in maintaining the status quo? Yet, as she stood there, a surge of resolve rushed through her veins. This was her chance to forge a new narrative, one that championed care over cold economic calculations. Grace, you know the reality of our funding, said the administration member again, calm yet unyielding. Fighting for what you want doesn't guarantee that you'll get it. She leaned forward, tapping into the ire sparked by his words. I'm not asking for the moon. I'm asking for us to be part of the discussion, not just a side note in a financial report. We owe it to our patients, we owe it to ourselves. Every sentence felt like throwing a stone into still water, ripples expanding outward. The managing director's narrowed gaze betrayed a sense of interest mixed with skepticism, while Jay offered a subtle nod of encouragement. Grace felt the surge of an internal tide, a push and pull between her training as a caregiver and evolving into an advocate. It was one thing to provide care. It was another entirely to demand respect for that care. Let's talk numbers, she began, transforming her fear into a calculated strategy. If we can demonstrate how investing in staff translates to improved patient outcomes, less burnout, better care, that'd be a compelling argument. Another colleague chimed in, but can we realistically measure that? They'll just look at the dollars and cents. Then we'll create metrics, Grace replied, inspired by her upbringing. Let us analyze data from departments that have prioritized staffing, compare our own performance metrics from prior years, and highlight the direct correlation to patient health and employee retention. She felt herself growing in that moment, drawing energy not just from her words but from the collective suffering they faced. Several heads nodded, renewed energy igniting in the room, but still one question lingered. How much of this was about courage, and how much was about fear cloaked in logic? As the discussions turned to the feasibility of Grace's proposals, she sensed the room slightly tilted in her favor. Yet, she was acutely aware that any victory would be tenuous. The director spoke up, her tone even yet resolute. Grace, I'll need written proposals and data. We'll review them in the upcoming meeting. The affirmation felt heavy, but Grace recognized it was also an invitation into a deeper engagement. Weeks of compounding dread and anticipation had come to a head in this singular moment of inquiry and acceptance. As the meeting drew to a close, she felt the raw power of vulnerability mixed with professional aspiration. Still, doubt lingered, not just about the meeting's outcome but about her capacity to lead this charge. Would she risk dwindling support the more she pushed against ingrained practices? The internal debate roared within her. Grace, Jay cautioned softly as they left the meeting, be careful. You're challenging long-held beliefs here. His concern cut deep, triggering her own apprehension. It was a reality check. But as she glanced back at the conference room where some members had banded together to discuss her proposal, a flicker of determination ignited again inside her. Change requires discomfort, doesn't it? And it's that very discomfort that will drive us to be better, she replied, her voice steady with newfound conviction. Little did she know the real battle was yet to come. As the prospect of future meetings loomed, so did the realization that she must fortify her strategies, anticipate resistance, and galvanize her colleagues behind her vision. The moment for mere dialogue had passed. It was now time to prepare for the confrontation ahead. Would the commitment she envisioned meet the harsh reality of entrenched systems? The crossroads of her journey awaited once more, and with it, the question of whether she could maintain her spirit once faced with the full weight of institutional opposition. Grace sat at her desk, the flickering blue light from her computer screen illuminating a series of open documents. Amidst the clutter of charts, graphs, and notes, an outline of her proposal lay waiting for her next move. The recent meeting echoed in her mind, a whirlwind of faces and reactions swirling around her like autumn leaves caught in a tempest. She needed to translate her verbal momentum into concrete plans. Yet the pressure felt palpable, as though the walls were closing in. How could she convert enthusiasm into actionable steps? She could sense the skepticism still lingering in the air, particularly from the administration. Their reluctance weighed heavy, yet there was an undeniable shift among her colleagues. Grace had ignited something, an ember of possibility, and she could not let it die out. Determined to deliver a thorough proposal, she began methodically assembling her data. Each figure and statistic served as both a shield against doubt and a weapon to dismantle the status quo. She knew the story behind those numbers. Stories of tired staff, overwhelmed families, and patients who deserved better. It became her mission to weave those narratives into her arguments, to give life to her dry reports and show the human impact of their work. Late nights became routine, as did the hum of the coffee machine, now her constant companion. With each passing day, a profound realization emerged from within, a robust sense of her own agency. She was not just a bystander in this process. She was an architect, crafting the very foundation of her vision. Grace found herself growing more adept at anticipating objections. She imagined the critiques that her colleagues might present, replaying their doubts in her head, sharpening her counterarguments as she went. Then came the moment of truth. The deadline for submitting her written proposal loomed. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, with only the vast unknown below. She found herself asking, what if this leap led to failure? The thought shivered up her spine. But with that doubt also came a fierce resolve. What if it succeeded? What if this was the catalyst for the change they desperately needed? The day finally arrived as she uploaded the final draft, heart pounding in her chest. She took a deep breath, succumbing to a wave of relief mingled with apprehension. However, the moment of peace was fleeting. The real confrontation awaited in the upcoming meeting, where the administration would dissect her proposal and respond to her calls for a holistic investment in staffing and care. Preparing for the session, she reflected on leaders she admired, those who had faced their own storms and weathered the turmoil. They had shown her that vulnerability and strength could coexist, that asking for what you need is a form of courage, not weakness. Yet amid this realization, another fear surfaced. What if she lost their support in the process? The thought sunk deep within her, twisting her stomach. Could she truly stand firm and risk it all on the strength of her beliefs? Grace found herself staring at her notes, knowing it wasn't just numbers she was fighting for, but the very essence of care that had drawn her into this profession. She swung the door open to the conference room. The air thickened with expectation. Each face turned toward her, a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and apprehension mirrored her own. Would they be willing to listen? Would they support her vision or silence it under the weight of convention? She sensed the moment teetering on the edge of something monumental, both terrifying and exhilarating. And as she took the first step inside, she realized the battle for their minds was nothing compared to the war she would wage within herself. The stakes had never felt so high, and with a breath that felt both steady and trembling, she began her presentation, ready to confront what lay ahead. As her words filled the room, one lingering question pulled at her. Was she truly ready for the backlash that might follow? The internal war had just begun. Grace's voice echoed off the polished conference room walls, each word carefully crafted yet laced with the vulnerability of the moment. She leaned into her proposal, emphasizing the statistics and weaving in the heartfelt human stories behind the data. As she progressed, she felt a spark of hope igniting within her, bolstered by the reactions of her colleagues. Some nodded along. Others scribbled down notes. A few even exchanged glances that hinted at growing interest. Yet, as she glanced at the administration, the tension remained palpable. Their expressions, a mix of scrutiny and skepticism, weighed heavily on her resolve. With every point she made, she could feel their doubt like a persistent shadow creeping closer, ready to pounce. But Grace pushed forward, focusing on the necessity of change, the undeniable truth that better staffing and care would enhance not only lives but also the institution's reputation. There was comfort in the act of sharing her vision, yet with it came an undeniable fear. She imagined their voices challenging her, barriers rising in defense of the entrenched status quo. What if they rejected her proposal outright? As she neared the conclusion, Grace felt the familiar chill of doubt creep back in. The overwhelming need to succeed collided with the crippling fear of potential failure. Yet, as she stood before them, poised to propose next steps, she recalled the leaders she admired, those who had dared to be different. They had influenced with conviction, not just data, and they carried their scars with pride. Maybe it was time to showcase her own vulnerabilities. I believe in what we can achieve together, but it won't come without difficult conversations, she said, her heart racing at the admission. It was a small act of bravery, acknowledging that change was never easy. I understand there may be concerns about resource allocation or operational disruptions, but if we close our eyes to the pressing needs, we risk losing everything we've built. The room stirred slightly, a murmur of agreement rippling through her peers. Did she detect a thawing of the tension? A longing to be seen beyond the spreadsheets and charts, to address the heart of the matter. Then came the questions, some challenging, others probing. But none prepared her for the moment when Laura, a longtime member of the administration, stood up to voice her skepticism head-on. Grace, while I appreciate your passion, I assent it naive to believe the administration will invest additional funds when we're already operating on tight margins. The air thickened again, and all eyes shifted back to Grace, waiting for her response. The familiar sensation to shrink back lurked in the corners of her mind. But she instinctively straightened, harnessing the unexpected tension as a catalyst for her next move. "Laura, I understand the concern," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "But our greatest asset lies not in our current limitations but in the potential we have to transform. Investing in our people means investing in our future and sustainability." The reaction was mixed. Some nodded in tentative agreement, while others remained skeptical. But Grace had ignited a spark, a willingness to engage in dialogue that hadn't existed moments before. Bolstered by this glimmer of progress, she pressed further, challenging not just the administration but herself. "What happens if we ignore the needs of our staff and community? Will we allow ourselves to stagnate?" As tensions rose before her, each face reflected the internal struggle. She felt an echo of her own doubts. The feedback wasn't merely a query about her proposal. It was a reflection of her journey, a barometer of the resistance she would encounter. As the meeting came to a close, Grace sensed the shifting dynamics of the room. The warmth of those who believed began to clash with the coolness of the skeptics. The battle raged on. Yet now she felt fortified, a newfound determination surging through her. This was more than paperwork. It was advocacy, a tick of progress in the cacophony of career risks. But as she collected her things, a new worry surfaced. What if the administrators opposed her passion? Her ideas were not just lightly colored proposals. They were a manifesto of change that some would prefer to ignore. As she left the room, the sense of urgency hung in the air, tinged with a lingering doubt. Was she prepared for the pushback that was surely coming? Back at her desk, Grace realized the real work was just beginning. Making a difference wasn't merely about presenting ideas. It was about creating an unyielding resolve to overcome barriers both external and internal. And as she sat down, determination flowed anew. She would need to plan her next steps carefully and remain resilient in her pursuit. The next confrontation was already forming on the horizon, and she was ready to face it head-on. What awaited her in the next meeting, the daunting backlash or a pathway to genuine change? Only time would tell. Grace took a deep breath as she sat at her cluttered desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and digital screens flickering with reminders of the tasks ahead. The adrenaline from the meeting slowly wore off, and a new wave of concern washed over her. She felt the weight of their scrutiny now more than ever. Doubts crept in, whispering that she had overstepped, that her newfound courage might just lead to professional risk rather than the transformative change she envisioned. She glanced at the clock. The next meeting was just hours away. In her head, she mapped out possible rebuttals against the critiques she knew would come up again, especially from Laura. Complications were sure to arise from discussing budget allocation. Would her passion be enough to sway those who viewed her ideas as threats rather than opportunities? An unexpected buzz from her phone snapped her back to the moment. It was a text from Jason, a trusted colleague. "You rocked it today. Let us brainstorm some tactics for tomorrow's discussion." Gratitude washed over her. Jason's belief in her vision felt like an anchor amidst the swirling uncertainty. Fueled by this encouragement, Grace began typing notes on her laptop, bullet-pointing key arguments and potential responses. She needed to anticipate every possible pushback, to prepare herself for anything Laura might throw at her. That sense of control bolstered her resolve, each word reaffirming her commitment to change. But the deeper she delved into her preparations, the more she realized there was another, more personal layer she had yet to confront: her own vulnerability. Grace had avoided addressing her insecurities, but if she wanted to enact genuine change, she needed to embrace them. It wasn't just about advocating for better staffing. It was about being real with herself and her colleagues. As she wrote, images of her early career flashed through her mind. The youthful confidence that once fueled her ambitions now felt like a distant memory. She remembered the tentativeness with which she approached her superiors, always fearful of overstepping. What if she reconnected with that zest and transformed her perceived weaknesses into strengths? Empowered by this epiphany, Grace began crafting a narrative. Not only would she articulate the pressing need for investment, but she would also share her personal story. She would allow them to see the passion behind the statistics, the experiences driving her advocacy. After all, if she could reveal her authenticity, perhaps that would resonate and shatter some of the skepticism around her proposal. Yet, as she prepared, the nagging fear returned. What if exposing her insecurities only served to undermine her credibility? With each passing minute, the momentum toward her next meeting grew. Juggling her anxiety with newfound resolve, Grace decided on a strategy. Incorporate her personal journey into the framework of her proposal, using it to illuminate the humanity behind the statistics. Before she knew it, she was pacing, testing the words in her mind as if rehearsing lines in a play. Investing in us means investing in the lives we touch. She stopped, looking out the window to the world beyond, bursting with possibility yet fraught with challenge. This felt right. Vulnerability could be her strength. As she finalized her points, an unsettling thought pierced through. What if this gentle admission created more division than connection? What if instead of empathy, she met resistance or ridicule? The tension tightened in her chest, the uncertainty thrumming in the air. As the meeting time approached, she knew this was more than a simple discussion. It was a turning point in her career. Embracing her truth meant risking rejection, but also the possibility of inspiring change. In that moment of contemplation, she resolved to stand tall, to confront whatever might come her way. With a final glance at her notes and a deep breath to steel herself, she headed toward the door, her pulse racing with anticipation. Whatever awaited her on the other side, applause or backlash, she was ready to face it head-on, prepared to lean into the very vulnerabilities that once held her back. As she stepped into the hallway, the echoes of doubt receded. This was a defining moment, and it was time to seize it. What if this time, rather than resistance, she found allies willing to support her vision? Only the meeting room would reveal the outcome. The door to the conference room felt both intimidating and inviting as Grace stood before it, her heart racing. She took a moment, breathing deeply, centering her thoughts before stepping inside. The room was filled with familiar faces, a mix of colleagues and leaders, with Laura's piercing gaze already trained on her. "Ah, Grace, you're just in time," Laura said, her tone dripping with skepticism. "We were just debating how to allocate our resources effectively." Grace's palms were slightly damp as she made her way to the front. She could feel the weight of the room bearing down on her, urging her to falter. Yet, the solid ground of her intentions held her steady. Each step felt like a reaffirmation of her commitment to speak her truth. "Thank you everyone for being here," Grace started, injecting a sincerity into her voice. "I want to discuss the necessity of investing in our team and our overall mission." As she launched into the statistics that highlighted the undeniable need for enhanced staffing, a wave of nervousness washed over her. The numbers on their own felt sterile, lacking the heartbeat of the stories behind them. But she pressed on, recalling her strategy, ready to intertwine her personal journey. Then she pivoted. "When I first joined this team, I was brimming with enthusiasm, yet often hesitant to voice my thoughts." Glancing at her colleagues, she saw varied expressions of curiosity and apprehension. "I remember a time when I felt like an outsider, afraid to share that I, too, questioned our approaches. But as I've grown within this role, I've learned that vulnerability is not a weakness but a path to connection and strength." With each word, she saw some faces soften, a flicker of understanding breaking through. Laura narrowed her eyes but remained silent, and Grace seized the moment. "Investing in our teams, our people, means investing in the lives we touch. Each statistic represents a person, each number a story worth telling." She felt the energy shift in the room, a lightness cutting through the tension. Yet, that nagging doubt returned. What if her gamble backfired? What if her openness rendered her weak? "Though I acknowledge that change can be uncomfortable," she continued, struggling to keep her voice steady, "it's necessary. My desire for this change stems from my own experiences here. We need to empower all voices in this room." She locked eyes with Laura, daring her to challenge the narrative. The atmosphere thickened as the room held its breath, waiting for the impending backlash. But then, as if caught off guard by Grace's courage, Laura hesitated. Her usual sharp demeanor softened slightly. Grace sensed the shift, a potential opening. Investing in our future costs more initially, but the cost of remaining stagnant, of sticking with outdated methods, is far greater. We owe it to our colleagues and to ourselves to evolve, Grace concluded, her heart pounding in her chest. A silence enveloped the room before Jason, ever the supportive ally, chimed in. Exactly, Grace. If we don't adapt, we risk losing the very essence of what we are trying to accomplish. Our team deserves better. To her surprise, the murmurs around the table began to rise, some nodding in agreement. A glimmer of hope flickered in Grace's chest as more colleagues started to voice their support for her proposal, building on her ideas rather than rejecting them outright. At that moment, the tension became palpable, not from confrontation, but from the sense of possibility filling the air. Grace felt the stirrings of this newfound alliance, a sense of solidarity that hadn't existed before. Yet, looming in the background was Laura, who remained silent, her expression unreadable. Grace's resolve solidified. She knew this was just the beginning. As discussions continued, she couldn't shake the feeling that Laura would eventually unleash her critique. Would the initial support hold strong? Or was it just a fleeting moment of empathy? With every word exchanged, Grace braced for the impending clash, feeling a rush of determination. This was not merely about the proposal. It was about her journey into authenticity. If she could confront Laura's eventual resistance, perhaps she could carve a path not only for herself but for the entire team. And yet, as voices rose around her, the lingering uncertainty reminded her that challenges still awaited. The real contest of will was just beginning. What pivotal moment would Grace face next? And what true test of her resolve lay ahead? As the meeting came to a close, Grace felt a whirlwind of emotions brewing inside her. The supportive murmur of her colleagues had brought her an unexpected rush of confidence. Yet the shadow of Laura's lingering silence loomed like a dark cloud. Would cooperation hold, or would it shatter at the first gust of opposition? With the meeting adjourned, she retreated to her desk, the weight of the day's discussions swirling in her mind. The echo of her own voice still rang, reminding her of the courage she had mustered. Investing in our people means investing in lives. Grace could hardly believe she had spoken those words in front of her peers. Yet here they were, resonating deeply within her. The afternoon sun streamed through her office window, illuminating the scattered papers that chronicled her journey. There was an undeniable shift that had occurred. The once timid worker had taken a tangible step toward advocacy. Her heart swelled at the thought, but the thrill was quickly dulled by the sharp realization that she had thrown herself into the lion's den. Laura would respond, and the potential fallout of the meeting had only begun to unfurl. Unable to focus on her tasks, she pulled out her journal to reflect. Writing had always been a therapeutic process for her, a means of processing thoughts that felt too weighty to carry alone. Pen in hand, she spilled her hopes and fears onto the page. What if I stood my ground and Laura unleashed everything destructive she harbored? Am I ready for the consequences of my honesty? At that moment, her phone buzzed, breaking her train of thought. It was Jason, reaching out to encourage her after a successful meeting. Heartened by his words, Grace banished her negative thoughts. Perhaps this was her moment to discover how much she could challenge herself, to face true conflict head-on. She couldn't let fear dictate her actions. This was about more than just statistics. It was about real lives and the future they all aspired to build. As days passed, the initial wave of support began to stabilize. Colleagues approached her, still buzzing with the energy from the meeting. They discussed ways to present her ideas to senior leadership more formally. It was exhilarating, yet as every conversation bloomed with potential collaboration, the anticipation of Laura's impending critique simmered in the background, a threatening stir beneath a calm surface. Weeks passed, and the inevitability of a direct confrontation grew increasingly tangible. Grace often found herself strategizing in advance. How should she respond to Laura's doubts? What had initially emboldened her in the conference room now flickered with uncertainty. The shadows of lack of confidence reemerged, whispering that perhaps this new voice would attract unwelcome scrutiny. Finally, A meeting with Laura was scheduled, and Grace could hardly breathe from the weight of dread. The stakes had never felt higher, and yet, as she prepared her notes, she felt the lines start to blur between her identity as a team member and a budding leader. Perhaps if she could frame the conversation with the confidence she had found, she could remind Laura of their shared goals, shift the dynamic. This was about the team's trajectory, after all not merely a personal triumph. Grace steeled herself, resolving to approach the conversation with a mindset not of defensiveness, but of partnership. Her path was beginning to align with a newfound strength, one that encouraged dialogue rather than divisiveness. But as she entered the room for her meeting with Laura, her heart raced not solely from anxiety, but with a deeper sense of purpose. This was not just a moment to defend her values. It was an opportunity to illuminate a path forward. Standing at the threshold, she felt the tension crackle in the air. This meeting would be pivotal, a tightrope strung between fear and bravery. As she crossed the threshold into Laura's office, Grace's mind buzzed with the weight of the encounter to come. Deep within her thoughts, uncertainty loitered. What awaited her, an ally or an adversary? Would she break through the barriers, or would Laura dismantle everything she dared to build? Grace inhaled deeply, ready to confront the reality of the situation she had invited into her life. The time had come to face not only Laura but the very essence of who she was becoming. As Grace entered Laura's office, the air felt thick with unspoken tension. She steadied her breath, grounding herself in the conviction she carried from her recent journey of self-discovery. This was not just a confrontation. It was a chance to defend the ideals she had embraced, to demand a commitment to care and empowerment in the face of institutional indifference. "Grace, thank you for coming," Laura began, her tone measured yet guarded. It was a neutral start, but Grace couldn't help but notice the tightness around her colleague's eyes. This was the moment. She was here to advocate not just for herself, but for a narrative of change that represented her entire team. "Yes, Laura. I wanted to discuss our conversation after the meeting," Grace replied, her voice steady. She reframed her shoulders, feeling the weight of both anticipation and preparedness. "As I mentioned, I genuinely believe investing in our team is foundational for our future." "Your passion is undeniable," Laura acknowledged, tapping her pen against the notepad in front of her. "However, we must also understand the constraints of budget and our operational limits. Emotions can't dictate our decisions." Grace sensed the challenge woven in Laura's words, a firm reminder of the opposition she faced. Yet this was her opportunity to leverage her emotional strength. "I don't think it's about emotions. This is about making a strategic decision that recognizes the value our staff brings. When we support our team, we enhance patient care, which ultimately reflects our institution's vision and success." "Well, you do paint a compelling picture, but what you propose requires resources that are already stretched thin," Laura countered. Grace leaned in. "What if we framed it differently? Instead of seeing it as a burden, we could view it as an investment in a culture of care. Departments that prioritize staffing efficiency have proven to reduce burnout and save on turnover costs. Isn't that worthy of exploration?" An unexpected silence enveloped the room as Laura considered this. "You're presenting this quite eloquently," she responded, acknowledging the shift in their dialogue. "But do you have specific metrics that can demonstrate that investment yields these results? It's one thing to advocate. It's another to deliver tangible results." "Absolutely," Grace replied, her heart racing. "I compiled data from similar institutions that addressed nursing shortages. They saw positive improvements in both patient satisfaction and long-term employee retention. By integrating those findings with our existing practices, I believe we can illustrate a path forward." She sensed a thaw in Laura's demeanor, and with it, a flicker of hope ignited in Grace's chest. This was not merely a transaction of disagreement. They were crafting a dialogue that centered on growth and pragmatic solutions. Laura's brow furrowed with concentration, and Grace could see her weighing the implications of these new insights. "And how would we initiate this process?" With renewed confidence, Grace laid out a potential timeline for implementing her proposals, detailing actionable steps and checkpoints for visibility. "If we take this approach, it won't feel like lifting the weight of the world. It could be a strategic roadmap, one that rallies our staff around shared goals rather than setting us against one another. It's about solidarity, not sacrifice. As she spoke, Grace felt the full weight of her journey culminating in this moment. She had transformed from a timid follower into a formidable advocate, ready to reclaim her narrative and influence the future of her institution. "I can appreciate the energy you're bringing to this," Laura replied hesitantly, eyes glancing toward her notes with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "I need to think this over. There are significant considerations at play. But if you can present a cohesive outline for the administration, I might be willing to champion this alongside you." The words hung in the air like a lifeline and opportunity. Grace knew that the real triumph lay in collaboration, the power of unity over isolation. "Thank you, Laura. I'll prepare that outline and include all necessary data. Together, we can pave the way for these ideas." As she exited Laura's office, Grace felt the triumph ripple through her every sense. She had challenged herself, confronted her fears head-on, and emerged not only unscathed but empowered. The legacy of her ancestors coursed through her, reminding her that her voice mattered, that she could carve out a space where healing and support reigned. Returning to her desk, the journal lay open beside a cup of coffee, the pages brimming with notes and reflections from her own journey. She smiled softly, knowing this chapter was but a glimpse of what lay ahead. She had transformed doubt into dialogue and despair into actionable change. Tomorrow would bring another meeting, a pivotal moment representing the culmination of her work. But today was a victory in itself, a testament to her growth. In this endeavor, she was not merely reliving a curse. She was shaping her own legacy, a story of empowerment, collaboration, and unwavering commitment to care. This was her moment. You need to subscribe now to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and let your support be heard. Comment your reactions and theories about this thrilling conclusion. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformative journey. Don't wait even one more second to spread the message of personal triumph.